I'm delighted to see you here today. As you see, I see the word has gotten out that we're holding prayer meetings once every other week now. They'll be held back at the Precinct Cabin, which is located by the Indian Creek at the back of the cemetery. Well, the Precinct Cabin, we built that about 2 years ago in 1840, and it was used, the primary purpose was as a place to hold township meetings and to vote. But it's the only public building in town, so we also use it as our school, and we use it as a place to pray. As our loved ones began to die, we went outside the school and began to bury them here. As a result, the name of this cemetery is Earl Township Precinct Cemetery. My name is Alan Brown. I came here with my two brothers, Alex and Andrew. And we located at the north side of the grove of trees in Earl. If I'm going to lose this hat in this wind, I may have to take it off. We came from a little town out in Massachusetts by the name of Cheshire, right next to Adams. And that town is as far as you can get west in Boston and Massachusetts and still be in the state of Massachusetts. Needless to say, we didn't take much trouble with these people in Massachusetts. My great-grandfather actually came to the Adams area. He pioneered that area. His grandfather pioneered in Rhode Island. And a line of them went back to the Mayflower. Now those Mayflower people were awful people. And they called us Rhode Islanders Rogue Islanders. So you can see not a lot of love lost between them and us. In any case, it was getting crowded out there. We'd been at Adams for 2 generations. So we decided that we were really ready to move on when we heard that Charles Sutphin had gone through coming to the Illinois territories, which had just opened up. And he was looking for a place to hold a new settlement. When he came back through, we heard stories about the rich land, without rock, we didn't have there, and adequate timber to provide for our fences and our homes, water sufficient to run a grist mill or a sawmill. It all sounded good to us, so we packed up and we came. Now Sutphin was an interesting person in that his father had passed away in the War of 1812. He was killed. His mother remarried, and he was really not going to be part of the new picture, so he went and lived with his grandmother, Mrs. Higginbotham. Well, Mrs. Higginbotham had some money, so she sent him on to academy. So he was educated. From there, he went a year at sea with Captain Law, came back to Boston, worked at the Custom House, proceeded from there to work as a paymaster with the United States Army, and also worked with the Vice President of the United States, who was at that time living in Boston. So he came to us with not only educated, but with a lot of ability. And he lobbied for the first post office in this area. He lobbied for a route that would go from Ottawa to Papa to Earlville to provide mail service. He lobbied for a road that was an all-weather road, split logs, right down this road in front of us, all the way from Earlville to Ottawa. It's called the Plank Road. So it opened this town to really, economically, goods in, goods out. Now a town is not made of just one family. This town had a dozen or so of us that came here. It was the Sutphins, the Cooks, the Browns, the Ballards, the Carters. We had 7 brothers with the Carters. The Immels, the Whites, and the Smiths. The Wallaces and the Wilsons. And there's many more. I'd like to go on and talk to you today, but I really am late for services. It's nice to see you. If you'd follow me this way.
Welcome to the Cemetery Walk. I'm told that Earlville will celebrate its 150th anniversary in a couple of weeks. My husband, Dr. Samuel Wiley, and myself, Clara Dara Wiley, came to Earlville after our marriage in 1847. We watched the town start out with baby steps, then grow into a prosperous and thriving little city. Upon arrival in Earlville, we settled into a home that Dr. Sam had previously built. It is still standing, located 2 doors north of the Presbyterian Church on Ottawa Street. Dr. Sam and his brothers first came to Harding. He migrated 7 miles north to here, and his brothers made their livelihoods in and around Harding. Many of the Wiley descendants remain in the area today, and it was wonderful to be surrounded by them all. In some people's eyes, it is a huge family, but I always said it was a family rich in life. Dr. Sam became Earlville's first resident physician after attending and graduating from Rush Medical School in Chicago. I became his life love and mother to our 4 children. Our son Frank followed in his father's footsteps and also served in Earlville. Between my husband and our son, a Wiley doctored in Earlville for a total of 99 years. What an accomplishment. Dr. Sam was a Republican and served our district in the state legislature for a period of time. During some of our conversations on state matters, I would often remark, I wish women could have a vote on that issue. And I think my feelings compelled me to become a part of the women's suffrage movement. One of my closest friends was Mrs. Susan Hoxie Richardson of this fair city. Her mother's first cousin was Susan B. Anthony, a person who would become a force to reckon with on the rights of women to vote. Even before our town was chartered, the Earlville Women's Suffrage Association was founded. The year was 1855, and we were considered quite progressive, as it would be 1869 before a state association was formed. Many ladies were quite indignant and felt it an insult that boys, upon reaching the age of 21, were deemed fit and able to vote and make laws for their mothers, and their mothers had no voice. The Earlville Association received state recognition, and a plaque is erected on a monument in a nice park I hope you visited called Dodge Park, located near the library. The plaque reads, "Here in 1855 was formed the Earlville Suffrage Association, with Mrs. Susan Hoxie Richardson president and Mrs. Octavia Grover secretary. The ESA was the first local women's suffrage society organized in Illinois and antedated the statewide Illinois Equal Suffrage Association by 14 years. A wonderful legacy and tribute to women nationwide. Don't you agree? Another of my worthwhile projects became the town library. 20 years after moving here as a young bride, the then public high school principal, Mr. Frank Hall, organized a library association. The association began 4 years after our town was chartered, so just think, our library is almost 150 years old also. The public and school libraries were combined, and subscribers paid anywhere between $1 and $10 in fees. It became tax supported in 1874. Mr. Hall donated an extensive collection of books, and friends of the library offered their homes to help house those books. The old city hall was eventually used until it too was deemed too small to hold all the acquisitions. So a committee was formed and the challenge of raising funds to make our dream a reality began. I served as president of the library board. Being president was important, but credit is due to the citizens and the supporters of our endeavor. Miss Fanny Burlingame, my good friend and colleague, served 40 years as the town librarian, and her efforts were unfailing. The cornerstone to the building was laid on July 27, 1911, and the dedication of the library was 11 months later on June 4, 1912. One of my favorite sayings is, "A book is a present you can open again and again. May this present be yours forever." The citizens of Earlville have much to be proud of, and it was my pleasure to help contribute to its growth. Please enjoy the rest of the walk.
Good afternoon. I am the granddaughter of one of the early settlers of Earlville. My grandparents were Alan and Sarah Bird Brown, who moved to Earlville from Berkshire, Massachusetts in 1838. My name is Eva Irene von Amy Blue. My grandparents were parents to 5 children. Sarah Jane Brown von Amy was my mother. She was the oldest. Having heard many glowing stories of the picture words of the greatness, they joined other hardy pioneers and began their journey. There were 3 families in the little colony: my grandparents, the Smiths, and the Burts. Travel was done via the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes. One morning, we found ourselves on the beachfront of Lake Michigan. The group was not impressed. They found just 2 little rude log huts, not cabins, mind you, just huts, and one was an inn. This was located on a frog-filled pond that had full of grass and lots of ducks, many flapping, quacking ducks. I'm sure you surmised by now that the area I've been describing is where Chicago now stands. The party of pioneers would never have dreamed that here, one of the finest and largest cities in the world, would develop. Arriving in Earlville, they came upon the area where the cavalcade was ordained to spend the rest of their lives. Their descendants would be numbered among the first families of the entire county. Grandfather Brown's worldly goods had been considerable, and he had no money problem. He bought and sold a large tract of land from the government and a small acreage of a discouraged settler. Their log house was the only building and stood where the Burlington Railroad Bridge crosses the Big Indian Creek. The view from the doorway was unobstructed in every direction, and not another human or house dotted the prairie. Grandfather decided to try raising sheep, and right away the wolves came in. So what the sheep didn't get, the dreaded prairie fires did. Pretty soon his horses sickened that had come all the way on their long journey, and he was in debt and had no animals. Grandmother helped save the day by planting apple seeds that she had saved from their trip from Massachusetts. Those seeds grew to produce a wonderful orchard. Anyone living on Brown Street might know where that orchard was. My mother, Sarah Brown, married my father, Alonzo von Amy. He was a farmer. I had one sister, Teresa. My birth record states that I was born in a log cabin in Earlville in February 22nd, 1854. I lived the days of my youth there and later married Andrew Jackson Blue. He was a mason by trade, and he was a veteran of the Civil War. Our wedding day was October 11th, 1878. Andrew built a home for us on North Street. That home currently stands and is owned by Otis and Margaret Skaggs. Some of you from Earlville may know where that is. We had only one daughter, Ethel. The night before our 17th anniversary, Andrew died suddenly. The obituary says that everyone in the community was surprised at his sudden taking off. I love their word pictures. Luckily, I had opened a millinery shop in Earlville, and I loved making hats, and doing things with my hands came natural to me. The hat that I'm wearing today is one of my original creations. It was most fashionable for ladies to wear hats no matter what the occasion, and it was especially nice if you could sell a patron a dress and a hat. I loved to crewel, and I would add little touches of lacing up to the collars and the cuffs of my dresses. I had a wonderful set of adjustable tin patterns. Those patterns enabled me to sew for every shape and size. Later, my great-granddaughter was a professor of home economics and fabric at the University of Arizona. After her retirement, she donated those tin patterns to a museum, and they are still housed in Tucson. I had some very interesting customers, and my shop was a spot for the ladies in town to gather. What fun it was. Later in my life, I lived in Harding, Illinois with my daughter Ethel and her husband Bill William Stockley. They had a farm just south of Harding. I was the grandmother to 10 of their grandchildren, so it was a busy household. When the first one was born in 1899, it was Gladys, and she became the 5th generation of the Browns to live in Earlville. The Earlville Leader had a wonderful article that showed what a great honor it was to have 5 generations of a family all living in Earlville. This was dated October 2nd, 1899. So there was quite, and the family was very proud of their accomplishment, and all the relatives were quite taken away with the fact that they did have that many that stayed there. My grandchildren included Gladys Wiley, Wilbur, Annie Irene Gonigam, Dorothy, Ruth Miller, Charlie, Russell, Lois Wright, Herbert Dean Stockley, and Robert Eugene. But some of the grandchildren referred to me as small but mighty, as I would not stand for any nonsense in the house. If they were unruly, I would get their attention when I would peck them on the forehead with my thimble, and that I wore almost constantly. My tiny little thimble reminded, was my life's work. I did everything. I quilted, I tatted. That's what I spent my life doing. One of my quilts is on display here, and that was a wedding gift that Grandma Blue did for my parents, for her grandchildren when they were married. This was Russell and Nell Stockley, and it was their wedding gift. Thank you for coming today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am, in fact, Lee O'Neill Brown, and I am proud to state that I was born and raised right here in Earlville. Let me give you a little family history. My father was Jacob Wardell Brown and my mother Margaret Spalding Brown, and they came from the great state of Maine. I was the eldest of 4 children. I was born on January 30th, 1866, followed by my sister Kitty, and then my parents had 2 infants also. Unfortunately, I was the only one to survive to adulthood. This is my sibling, my brother Spalding, my brother Lee, and then my sister Kitty, who died at the age of 5, and then my father and my mother here in the family plot. I guess you could say I had a normal childhood, regardless of the way people dress. It was very normal. My parents worked very hard, and they wanted what parents today want. They wanted their kids to be successful. They wanted them to know the difference between right and wrong. And from my father, I got a very strong moral compass, a very strong sense of right and wrong, a good dose of common sense, but also a good dose of legal sense. Because you see, my father was also a very prominent lawyer here in LaSalle County, as well as a practicing attorney in Earlville, and also served as the city attorney for the city of Earlville. I did attend the Earlville schools. Following that, I went to Normal College. There's too many jokes that you can make with that. Went to Normal and became a lawyer. Normal College, but I graduated from Wesleyan Law School in 1888. And although I was a very brilliant student with a very analytical mind, I was not afraid of hard work. In fact, I remember back in 1887, while I was still in law school, I worked uptown for Dave Large's blacksmith shop. I was a helper there and was paid the sum of $4 a week, payable on Saturday night. Now, I don't know if there was any significance to that for sure or not, but $4 a week, payable on Saturday night. When I graduated law school, I came back to Earlville to practice law, and also became the city attorney for the city of Earlville. But the big city beckoned me, this poor little country boy. The big city beckoned, and so I moved my law practice to Ottawa. Over the years, I had several different partners, Frank Ayers, Dan Trainer, and finally Herbert Wiley. In 1900, I was elected to the lower house of the General Assembly in Springfield, Illinois, where I was proud to represent and advocate for LaSalle County. I was a staunch Democrat. But even at that time, there was a thing known as some factions in the General Assembly known as the machine politics. You may not believe it, but it came out of Chicago. But I didn't like to play that game, so I kind of antagonized the party leaders right from the beginning. I believe I was elected to serve the people of Illinois and the people of LaSalle County, and that was my first concern, and not with the people up in Chicago, the so-called party leaders, what they were thinking and what they wanted. So I kind of got them a little upset when I wouldn't take orders from them and agreed to be their whipping boy, or abide by the, what do we call them, talking points, I think you call them today. So I would not take my orders from them. I did feel a bit of a backlash from my fellow legislators and also from the Chicago press, but I believed in following my beliefs on many of the bills and voting on those that I thought benefited the people of the state of Illinois. And I was determined to serve my constituents faithfully. One example was a bill that would foist a bonded indebtedness upon the people of Illinois without them having a chance to say yes or no to it. It was going to cost millions of dollars. Well, the Chicago press, they were for it, and they advocated heavily for it, and they denounced hysterically and viciously my allies and me on this particular issue. So I kind of became a little bit of a stumbling block in their way, and by not following the total party line. In 1910, there was an effort made to officially end my career. The efforts were made to end my career, and so I had to defend my good name against some very serious charges. Now, at that time, the senators that were sent to Washington were chosen by the state legislature. And there was a story going around that I was one of the ones who was instrumental in causing someone to change their vote, buying a vote. Not that that would ever happen today, I'm sure, in the great state of Illinois. And I think we can ask ourselves, here it was in 1910, and accusations of buying out a seat for a U.S. senator. Have things really changed? Fortunately, the machine lost. In fact, I was acquitted twice on the charges. And I was able to stay a legislator fighting for LaSalle County in the state of Illinois for another 18 years. In 1924, I ran for the Democratic nomination to be the great governor of the state of Illinois. That would have been quite a feather in the hat of Earlville to have a lawyer or have one of their home people be elected governor and not wind up in jail. But I ran on the Democratic platform, but I ran on a wet platform. 1924, Prohibition. I ran on a wet platform because that's what I thought the people wanted. Unfortunately and ultimately, I lost in the Democratic primary. Some of my legislative successes that I'm really proud of, I'll just mention three. I supported a measure for the state to buy Starved Rock and turn it into a state park. I also supported efforts for the state to build a memorial just down the road at Shabana Park. And my latest was the passage of a bill for a state monument to Wild Bill Hickok over in Troy Grove. Well, I continued also being a lawyer in Ottawa. In fact, I was defending a young man by the name of Harry Hill, who was on trial for the murder of his mother. Now, as you can imagine, this was a very divisive O.J. Simpson type trial where the public was very divided as to whether he actually did it or not. There were threats abounding. People were writing letters, threatening letters. You had letters from cranks and sob sisters, all these people who were trying to make their feelings known. And so the sheriff really had his work cut out for him in even trying to protect Mr. Hill. Well, one day, During the trial, it was noon recess, and court was not scheduled to resume until about 2 p.m. This was on February 2nd, 1928. And another attorney from the city of Chicago, a Mr. Charles McNamara, had been down. And so I invited him out to my home for a lunch. Now, I lived in Ottawa. I lived at 640 Chapel Street, which is on the Fox River on the east side of town. Beautiful 3-story brick mansion. If you ever happen in the area, drop by. We'll sit on the porch and we'll pass howdy for a while. But it's still there. And I was very proud of my little modest estate. Well, the story goes that I was showing him around the grounds. And we went down to the retaining wall down by the river. And as the story goes, I climbed up on the wall. Well, I can't tell you what happened after that. The only thing that I know for sure is that was the day that I died by drowning. That's the only thing I do know. Okay? But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to consider the following, please. It was February, and you know what February is like in Illinois. The weather very unfit. I was 62 years old. Some thought to be too old to be walking on top of a retaining wall. In fact, it hadn't been too long ago that I was walking on that wall and actually fell off. I was saved only by my suspenders, which happened to grab onto a hook. So it's February, unfit weather, 62, and there was only one witness. A lawyer from Chicago. So I ask you, Mr. McNamara, was he a friend or was he a foe? Did I fall in or did I get help? I will leave that up to you. We'll leave the mystery there, and I ask you to enjoy your sleuthing as you try to uncover the mystery. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hill?
What's that?
What happened to Mr. Hill?
Mr. Who? I was dead. It didn't matter to me. You know, I forgot to look that up.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Samuel Stilson. I was born in 1814, and when I heard you were coming and realizing that, geez, I'm 199 years old this year, maybe I'll just make a few notes. So forgive me if I refer to these note cards. You know, memory fails with age, they say. I was born in 1814 in Connecticut, the son of Abigail and Curtis Stilson. Shortly after my birth, we moved from Connecticut to New York, Chautauqua County in New York. We were pioneer farmers, and as pioneer farmers, we had a small crop of barley and oats, some wheat. But our primary crop was corn because it stood better during the harvest. We had a garden, livestock, a few horses, we had a milk cow and a yoke of oxen. We had a few pigs and sheep. I don't know why my dad ever had sheep, but we had sheep. Along with chicken and geese and all of those other things. You see, unlike today when there's fences around and the animals couldn't roam, then they could roam. And the pigs were fine. You know, they could root around and they could find chestnuts and acorns and feed themselves, but those darn sheep were always getting in trouble. It seems that it was my job as the son to run them off, to run off the coyotes, to pull the sheep out of the thickets. Never did understand why we needed them. But I wanted to move west. It was always my dream to move west. You may be asking, well, how did you earn enough money to go west? Well, for a young person in New York, in the wilderness, there was opportunity. That opportunity was found in the land was being cleared of the trees and the lumber, or the trees used for lumber. And the stumps, well, the stumps had to be burned to make the land tillable. And so the stumps, as they were burned and produced potash, I sold that potash. I sold it for a good price, saved all my money. In addition to that, I tapped the maple trees. Some say I made the best maple syrup in the East Coast. I also sold tamarack. Tamarack, not the tree, but the bark, the tanneries. And nature was good to us. It provided honey, beeswax, ginseng. Some even trapped beavers and mink. I didn't do that. But by the time I was 20 years old, I was able to secure the deed to my father's homestead. But still I yearned to go west, and so in 1838 I set out to go west. I was 24 years old when I arrived here in LaSalle County. I bought 400 acres from Mr. Sutton. You know, it was the gentle prairies, the groves of trees, much like you're standing in right now, that drew me to this area. I built the first home in the new section of Earlville. It was built on a block, and later I would add an addition. It was a frame addition. And it would house the post office and the hotel. I knew if this town was going to survive, we needed commerce. And at that time, the Burlington Northern was expanding and going west, and so we convinced them to stop here, to go through Earlville. Long story short, I sold them the land they needed. But if we were going to have them stop here and stay for any length of time, we needed a depot. And so I partnered with others and we built a depot. It really put us on the map when we built the depot. People would stop and stay. People would bring their crops to the train. It was well worth the effort, the time. I always thought a great deal of family. It was very important to me. In fact, some would question this, but that stone right there says my father and mother were the first people buried in this cemetery. I married what I believe is the prettiest girl west of the Ohio River, Eleanor Wood. We lost our first child. But then God blessed us with 4 more children, Davis and Cora and Samuel. And then there was a 4th one. Talbert. Talbert was our 4th. How could I forget Talbert? But you know, each of us have problems in our lives. There's difficulties that fall to each of us. My Cora left me far too soon. My Eleanor left me far too soon, excuse me. She's buried right there. But the Lord saw fit to bless me with another wife, Sarah. I was 40 when I married Sarah, and Sarah, well, Sarah wouldn't want me to tell you how old she was, and so I won't. But together we had 3 beautiful daughters, Lizzie, Ella, Marie. Life was good for us. But then the nation, there was an unrest in the nation. It had to do with slavery, and as the slavery moved westward, that unrest became greater. You see, Illinois came down on the side of freedom, and I believed in that too. By the time the war broke out, Davis and Samuel were old enough to enlist, and they enlisted right here in Earlville in the 104th Infantry, Illinois Infantry. I was proud of my sons that they were fighting for what we believed in. But I also, each day, grew more and more concerned about their welfare and lifted my prayers, earnest prayers to God for their safety. When the war ended, Davis came home to us. He had been imprisoned at Fort Campbell. He wasn't the best of health. He was weak. A year later, he died. In fact, he's buried right there. Samuel fared better. He came home and he was thin and worn, but healthy just the same. And being, I suppose, much like his father, he wanted to go west, and so he did. He moved to Nebraska, and it was there that he settled. You see, some refer to me as the father of our town, and I'm proud when I hear that. I simply set out to accomplish a vision that I had for this community. You see, if this small settlement was going to turn into a community, then we needed to plot it out. And I laid out this plot here. We turned acreage into lots and lots into homes and yards, stables and streets. Yes, I'm proud to be known as the father of the community. I built the first post office. You know, it only made sense if people were going to communicate with the people back east, their friends, their family, they needed a post office. And so I built that post office. Built the first hotel. Train was going to stop here, people would need a place to stay. And I partnered with Mr. Hayden. And together we built the first elevator. In fact, Mr. Hayden's buried right over there. But I also need to tell you that I was part of founding the first bank of Earlville. I partnered with Mr. Halleck, and I soon learned that banking wasn't my forte, and so I sold my shares back to Mr. Halleck, and it turned out it wasn't his forte either. The bank soon closed, and he absconded with all the depositors' money. I didn't see that one coming. It took me a long time to get over that. Scoundrels appear in the darndest places. But I hope that in generations, people will see that I always tried to do what was best for this community. I strive to that end that this community may continue to flourish and grow. I pray that generations later will find me successful. Thank you for stopping by and visiting me this day.
Earlville Country Club. As members today, we are grateful to the founding members for creating a pasture considered an ugly duckling, ranked with grasses, bushes, and brambles, and broken down trees to a beauty of a diamond in the rough. We now have a stately trees, lush greens, fairways, a natural water hazard, Indian Creek, which creates some trouble with floods at times, but we're always up to the challenge. 85 years, 1928 to 2013. That adds up to a lot of swings, whiffs, drives, chips, and putts. Muttering, sputtering, exaltation, exaggeration, frustration, and gleefulness, and you've covered the game of golf. I'm Frank Green. I'm currently serving on the board member of the Earlville Country Club. My fellow golfers and I were invited to share some golf stories with you today, and it's only fitting to be here at Jim's Monument with its great golf etching. Please enjoy our presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Russell. I grew up in Earlville, went to grade school and high school here. I lived on Grant Street, which is just 1 block from the golf course. One of my good friends and classmates and neighbors was Don Blakesley. His folks were Wib and June Blakesley, who also lived on Grant Street. Evidently, Webb liked living next to the golf course and on Grant Street because in the time I was there, he lived on 3 different homes on Grant Street. He lived a block south of me, he lived a block north of me, and he lived across the street from me. So when I'd go out to see Don, I'd have to think, where do they live today? The country club is located on land that Webb's grandparents, the Beals, used to own. The Beals owned and operated a brick and tile factory on that ground. Webb's father, Dr. Blakesley, was the town dentist. Being very civic-minded, he and Dr. Rayson, who many of you knew, they were responsible for the number 4 green back in 1928. Many people today still consider the number 4 green a mighty tough green to play. Well, Webb followed in his father's footsteps, also in being very civic-minded. He owned the dry cleaners in town, and he also taught school in the Sandwich school system. It was obvious that Webb loved the Earlville Country Club. I worked there many days, and I would see him there during the day when he got off work. I would see him there on Sundays. He served on the board, and he definitely loved it. He got his son Don and I a job there in the summer. We watered the greens, we mowed the greens, we took care of the odds and ends, but when I would get done, I would go and hunt golf balls in the afternoon, and that meant that Joel Zimmerman was my boss for part of the time. And that might mean something to some. At the 50th anniversary of the country club, Webb gave a speech telling about the original 40 men that had the vision and the initiative to found the golf course. Great thing. He was also quite a character. Webb was a very interesting guy, if you know him. I would go to his house. It was a lot of fun to be around. I'd walk in and he'd either be sitting, reading a book in his den, smoking a pipe, or he'd be beating on the piano. He had the uncanny sense of humor that people love, but he also had the God-given talent to play the piano by ear, and he could play song after song, and people would enjoy it. Webb delighted and entertained everybody who called him friend.
Good afternoon. My name is... Go ahead. Good afternoon. My name is Jack Landers, member of the Earlville Country Club, and I played a lot of golf with Jim Malley. Very entertaining. I also played a lot of golf with Ralph Schmitz. His nickname was Straight Arrow. Another man was Ron Hasenjager, and his name was Pipeline. Well, for obvious reasons, you know, they hit the ball right down the middle, never missed the fairway, and most golfers would love that ability. The Ladies Auxiliary were an active group. They were responsible for the funds raised to build the current clubhouse up there. Many golf games, card games, stories have been replayed on that porch. Various groups have used the clubhouse for fundraisers, family reunions, picnics, parties, anything imaginable. The Lions Club breakfasts were also very popular. One Halloween party, a member livened things up when he appeared as an outhouse. Very entertaining. The ladies deserve a lot of credit for their accomplishments. I have one story to tell about Uncle Herb Stockley. We had the Earlville Lions Club play day there, and we always had a long drive contest on number 4. It's for 340 yards. You know, Herb didn't play a lot of golf, but he loved the game. Well, at the end of the day, there's always a placard out there, and his name was the last one on the list. And we thought, wow, that's kind of strange. So we questioned Herb. We said, Herb, your name is the last one on the list. He says, did you have the longest drive? And he said, well, sure. He said, it was up there by the green. He says, I did that in 2 shots. He said, well, Herb, that's, longest drive is just 1 shot. And he says, well, nobody could hit the ball up there that far in 1 shot. He didn't know about the Sipula boys, I think.
My name's Al Stegman. I began golfing at the Country Club in 1956. Needless to say, things have improved with the greens and the whole layout. When back in the early days, that's what they used for flag sticks and cups, a tin cup and a bamboo fishing pole. The Country Club is very proud of members of the community who became golf pros. Not the touring pros that you see on Sunday afternoon on TV, but rather teaching pros. John Bauer, Steve Atherton, Lance Olson grew up playing here. Beth Bauer, granddaughter of Shirley Bauer, is another excellent lady golfer who played in the PGA. In fact, she was national amateur champion 1 year and rookie of the year the next on the LPGA. Sarah Wall, another native, worked with the LPGA determining the difficulty of golf courses in the United States for Golf Digest.
We have another story. I have a friend that came here late in life, Joe Carbone. He was out in Hollywood when he was young, and he used to work at all the restaurants. He went to the Hollywood's home, Stars Homes and everything. Well, he came here, and we had a junior league on Mondays. In junior league, you try to send one adult out with all the kids to teach them golf etiquette, everything about the game. Well, this particular day, I was behind Joe. He had a group and I had a group. I was on 7 tee off, and I'm watching my kids. And I'm noticing that Joe's group is on 8 tee off. Or no, Joe's down below 8, and his kids are all the way up by the green. So I told my kids, I said, I better go check on Joe. So I run over in my cart. I pulled up next to him. I said, Joe, you all right? Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't know he had sleep apnea. He fell asleep. I said, you better go. Away he went, boy, just to run it. I got his cart just to barely. Another night, I happen to be the one on call for the police when there's damage down at the golf course. Well, I got a call at 4 in the morning from the county police. They said, somebody hit one of your buildings. I said, which one? They said, well, one of the buildings. I said, all right, I'll be down there. I thought, well, they hit the tractor building or the cart shed building. I pulled in the gate and the whole kitchen had been pushed all the way to one wall. They thought they were on Water Street, and our street, as you know, Oak, is a dead end. They drove right through the kitchen. And they got that car back out of there and got it out on number 1 tee off, and then they deserted the car. Well, they eventually caught them, but these guys are long gone. They're out of the country, so we got nothing out of it. That's it for me. Eddie?
I'm Ed Malley. There are many stories about my father James and his involvement with the country club. I don't know where I would start to tell one or where I would finish, so I suppose I won't. He began playing golf at the age of 11, getting tips on the game and etiquette from Ed Rayson, who took him under his wing. Back in the day, there were no motorized golf carts. Players used a pull cart or carried their bags. There were quaint little red and white bridges on 5 and 9 to cross the creek, which weren't large enough for golf carts to begin with, so that's why they're running up. Dad and my mother Jo were very active golfers involved in the club. Mom also played bridge and was a member of the ladies' organization. They were responsible for hosting the ladies' play days. The ladies were renowned for their wonderful meals, with as many as 100 attending the event. Rumor is there were foursomes partaking of a cooling libation to enjoy before lunch. Way to go, ladies! The most meaningful project my dad undertook was the E.W. Malley tournament in honor of his father and my grandfather. Since 1971, it has been an annual event at the club every 4th of July week. The Malleys continue to support it and have been very proud to contribute and honor 2 great guys. Thank you.
We have golfers from young to old, male and female. Mr. Bob Hatter is the oldest member we know, and he is 91 years young. Wayne Todd is 89 years young. We know a team of 2 guys, 83 and 84, who enjoy showing the younger golfers how to win. They still play in the men's league. They would be Mr. Fritz Nelson and Mr. Ted Zimmerman. Perhaps you can engage them in a little friendly competition. Keep the masters in sight. That concludes it, folks.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you very much.
I was born Barbara Jane Rayson, the only daughter of Dr. Edwin and Mrs. Lillian Rayson. I had a big brother, Edwin, named after my father. I was born in the era of the Roaring '20s. It was a time when women wore flapper dresses, smoked cigarettes in long holders, and wore lots of makeup. They danced the Charleston and tango in nightclubs. My family home was on Grant Street. Some folks called it Silk Stocking Row. Most of the people living there were business owners and professional people, just like my dad. To me, they were our friends and neighbors. The best part was all the kids I played with. It was wonderful to be loved and watched over by so many people. I went to first grade, and during that year, a new legs felt hot, and looking down I saw my skirt was on fire. It happened so quickly. I ran downstairs and burst out the door, screaming for dear life. I didn't know how to drop and roll like the kids are taught to today. The neighbor, Mr. Van Ornum, came running and threw me to the ground, rolling me and beating at the flames. After the fire was out, he wrapped me in a rug and carried me home. Through my tears and gasps, I told Mr. Van Ornum what I had done with the candle. My dad was on a call, and Dr. Frank Wiley came to help Mama dress the burns and to medicate me. My dad arrived home and realized how great burned. But he knew Dr. Wiley had done all there was to do. Father and Mama kept vigil over me all night, but to their despair, I died the next morning on Mama's 35th birthday. I was 7 years old. And here's my dad to tell you his story.
Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Edwin Hope Rayson. If you are a native of Earlville or have lived here for a long time, chances are I doctored you or maybe even was present at your birth. My loving wife was Lillian Ashley, and her parents came from Aberdeen, Scotland, a place known for Aberdeen Angus cattle. I was the son of William and Elizabeth Hope Rayson, who came from Cumberland, England. They were settled in Holyoke, Massachusetts, where I was born in 1896. I graduated from Loyola University School of Medicine and served my internship at Cook County Hospital. Shortly after that, I came to Earlville and set up a practice. My first office was on the second floor over Jack Robinson's drugstore. The building was on the northwest corner of Railroad Street and Ottawa Street. There was a covered stairs folks had to climb to come to my office. Today, a single-story laundromat stands on that site. The town dentist, Dr. Blakesley, and I shared a common waiting room. He and I forged a strong friendship that lasted all the years I was in Earlville. Our office hours coincided with the other local businesses, closed on Thursdays and Sundays. If you were new in town and wanted a Thursday appointment, it didn't take long to realize men's golf league played every Thursday. Many times I had to leave in the middle of a golf game to attend patients. I played baseball as well, and it happened then too. Besides my daughter Barbara, my wife and I are blessed with two sons, Edwin, the oldest, and John. John was born the year after Barbara died. There are no words to describe the loss of a child, and our family cherishes memories of our dear, beloved little Barbara. Her mother requested a picture of Barbara be buried with her when she went to her eternal home. Our home was on Grant Street, as Barbara said, also known as Silk Stocking Row. Some of the others on that fine street were the Van Ornums, T.M. Anderson, the Holmes, Swansons, the Zimmermans, and the Kierans. We all lived there during the Great Depression. When World War II began, doctors were in short supply, and in the fall of 1942, the Army beckoned. My rank was Captain, U.S. Army Medical Corps. I reported for training in Texas, then on to Oklahoma before my transfer to India in 1944. I served for 26 months. Back home, my wife Lillian and son John returned to Massachusetts. My wife returned to Massachusetts to live with her aunt and uncle while I was away in the Army. Lillian resumed her nursing career at that time. Son Edwin was at the University of Tennessee, and after graduation joined the Navy. He was stationed in the Pacific during the war and was serving as a bomb detonator and researcher for a nuclear bomb. We came home at the end of the war and joined the town in celebrating the great victory. Earlville had sent many of its sons to serve, and upon their return, the town showed their appreciation with a celebration of triumph mixed with joy and sadness. I resumed my practice with a new doctor in town, Dr. O.H. Fisher. Between the two of us, we covered nearly every birth. We might have delivered some of you. Someone told me I delivered 1,600 babies over the years. That's about 150 to 200 babies a year. That office is now a residential home and is on the southeast corner of Church and Ottawa Street. Mrs. Marge Major was our office nurse and was a dedicated and faithful employee. In 1951, I became an active medical staff member at Mendota Community Hospital and was there for the groundbreaking. That was the time when Route 34 was straightened and diverted south of town. My affiliation with the hospital lasted until my retirement in 1964. Upon my retirement, Lillian and I decided we'd rather live closer to the grandchildren, so we packed up and moved to Tennessee. I hope you don't mind that we left Earlville behind. But we always remember our sons had a wonderful upbringing in Earlville. Ed was inseparable from Louis Schrettengoss and Frank Jenner. John and his buddies Bud Swanson, Jerry Zimmerman, Jimmy Cairns, Dud Hum, and Tom Anderson were often referred to as the Grant Street Gang. Speaking of our boys, we all love sports and traveled to see many games. The Cubs, the Bears, and the White Sox. I especially remember seeing the great Babe Ruth play at a Sox game. Lillian used to entertain on a regular basis and was known to set a beautiful table. But everything Lillian did was beautiful. She never got frazzled when a patient needed me. She was gracious and understanding with my profession. She became known as the cookie lady to the kids of the neighborhood. Lily and I belonged to Presbyterian Church, and we supported many organizations in town, helping to raise money for the school, the library, and the golf club. Actually, I was a founding member of the Earlville Country Club. Dr. Blakesley and I sponsored hole number 4. I served as president of the library board, chaired National Bank of Earlville, and was president of the school board for 2 terms. I was an active member of the Meridian Lodge, the American Legion, and the Lions Club. It often seems I hardly had time to practice medicine. As I mentioned, when I retired, we moved to Tennessee, and I realized I wasn't really the retirement kind of guy. I joined the medical staff of the East Tennessee Psychiatric Hospital and remained there past my 70th birthday. On my 80th birthday, I joined the Shannondale Retirement Community in Knoxville, Tennessee, and continuing doctoring. I was conferring with patients and holding a medical book when I collapsed and died on November 17, 1977. I was 81 years old. I enjoyed my life as a doctor and living in this small town. The Racing family was proud to be part of Earlville's history. Thank you for listening to our story.
Well, thanks for coming. You're looking at the 2 youngest Dias children. This is Jan and John. Our sister Jean and brother Ron. And joined mom and dad, Chuck and Roya Dias, in a much better place. I'm sure you all agree. I hope you've learned a great deal here today, because yesterday when I made the walk practice for the first time, I have to say I really enjoyed it, and the people who were presenting just terrific. Thank you for coming. We are definitely honored to be here. Dad, if I'm not speaking loud enough, just give me a sign. I'll try to help. The whole. As most of you know, Chuck Dias really loved the movie business. His dad, it was never work. It was his hobby. It was fun for Dad to be there until 1 o'clock in the morning. Some of us kids didn't appreciate that because there was school the next day. But we were there anyway. Dad saw his first movie in 1914. And believe it or not, that started 74 years of love for the movie industry. He spent 55 of those years in Earlville. Dad started as a projectionist at the young age of 13 in Plano, Illinois. He met this dark-eyed, beautiful Romanian girl who later became his wife and our mother, Gloria Orr. Dad always referred to her as Mom. Mom was a daughter of a Romanian, very strict Baptist minister. And as many of you know, many years ago, they frowned on movies. So Mom and Dad eloped in 1925 and were married a full year before they finally admitted to Grandpa that they were married. He did forgive them, but it wasn't until Dad became mayor of Earlville that he in the early years of their marriage. Mom and Dad were in both the Plano theaters and the Mendota theater. In 1932, they came to Earlville, moved here, and bought the Larry Theater. During the first years of owning the Leary, Mom opened a restaurant in town on Main Street. And during the early war years, early 40s through 45, Mom worked at the Sandwich Hospital as a nurse. Now, Dad had a couple of hobbies. One was taking movies, the other was throwing special events. I'm sure some of you here will remember some of those events. I'll go through just a couple. In World War II, the big thing was a scrap drive. So anyone who brought 5 pounds of steel to the movies got into the movies free. And by the way, if you wore your uniform, you came to the movies free. Dad really loved those men who served. In 1939, Dad brought the entire Wizard of Oz props, all of them, including the live animals, to Earlville. How many big theaters didn't get that? But Chuck did. I remember Dad telling me this. I was a little young for this, but Dime Night was very big during the Depression years. Just like Dollar Night was very big for the drive-in theater when we opened that. Let me think, in 1952, how many of you were around? All right? Well, you remember going to the football game, maybe the homecoming football game? And Dad was there with a 16mm camera, capturing Barbara Hale and her whole entourage during halftime at homecoming. That was a pretty big deal. In 1953, Dad held drawings for Schwinn bicycles. That was a pretty big deal. And some of you may remember Gary Wolf. Gary won one of those bicycles. You remember the Sunbeam bread? Sunbeam bread was pretty popular, and it was famous for the beautiful little girl who was on the wrapper. Dad held a Sunbeam bread look-alike contest. And much to my surprise, just a few years ago, I discovered that Connie Miller was one of the contestants. Yeah, she's kind of related to me. All right. Many of you will recall Dad did serve as mayor 3 terms. The first 12 years was 2 terms of 1945 to 1953. His 3rd term was from 1957 to 1961. Dad really enjoyed being mayor. And in fact, he was very proud of the fact he got $50 a year for being mayor of Earlville. And it's hard. What he was most proud of being there was those people who were elected as aldermen and served with him. Probably his proudest moment was in 1946. They opened Marathon Electric, and that really helped Earlville. It increased our economy, gave us a lot of employment. It was great for us. Naturally, we're all sorry to have lost it. Dad's second hobby, as many of you know, if you've been uptown to the 150th headquarters, was 16mm movies. He loved to shoot any special event in and or around Earlville. He even shot Ronald Reagan up in Dixon in 1945, and we still have those pictures. They're terrific. Take time, if you haven't already, go on up to the headquarters and see the movies of Dad talking not only about the industry, but Earlville. Yesterday, Jan and I brought another tape for them to add to their collection. I forgot my movie posters were buried in the drive-in theater in California. I apologize, but I will mail them out. Taking movies, probably, I should add that my brother, he was a professor at the university, his student put together Dad's footage from 1930 to 1957. And I got a kick out of watching it just last night.
If I don't speak loud enough, you can also give me the full hand. Okay. Dad had the foresight to see the changing times, and in 1953 the family started building the drive-in theater. It opened in 1954, the Dias 34 Drive-In Theater, just west of Earlville. In fact, Tuesday will be the 59th anniversary of the drive-in opening. Opening day, there were more people watching them pull the screen tower up because it had built on the ground. I remember standing beside my mom, and with every creak of that tower as it was coming up, I was afraid she was going to have a heart attack, that they were going to drop it. But there were more people to watch that than the movie that night. So many people worked either at the Lyric or the Library, and I wish I could name them all. If you know someone, or if you worked there, can I see?
Raise your hand if you know somebody who worked there or you worked there. There's a few good ones.
Many young couples, I remember parking in the back ramps and Dad checking on things with our German Shepherd Jet, especially on steamed windows, but I won't ask you to raise your hands. Dad knew how many kids sneaked in. They either in the trunk of a car or around the fence. He rarely made them pay. He thought if they wanted to see the show that bad, they deserved to see it. You may remember we had an unusual family pet, Chippy the monkey. He used to be in the lilac bush out in front of the house, and when people would come by, Chippy would jump down on a branch and go, ah!
He was only that big.
I'll let John take over now.
Okay. The Lyric stayed open. The Lyric Theater stayed open 2 years after we opened the drive-in theater. But as you know, television had hit even Earlville, and Mom sold the Lyric in 1956. Our mother, Lori, died in 1968. At that time, we really tried to convince Dad to retire, but he wouldn't hear of it. He wasn't about to give up his passion, his love of the movie business. Dad later married Wilma Seward, who continued to work at the drive-in theater and took care of Dad when he was ill. They were married for 17 years. Besides the four of us kids, probably there are very few of you here who will remember my mom and Dad also raised 16 other children. Many of these children were either having problems with the law or problems with their families, or had a child out of wedlock. A lot of these people showed up when my mother died in 1968. As you know, we worked hard at the drive-in, and we loved what we did. But we learned a great deal. But what did we learn? The value of work. How to treat people.
The need for a positive attitude when everything was going wrong. I can remember when everything was falling apart, none of the cars would start, and Dad always made a joke out of it. And the glass was always half full, never half empty. Both Ron and John followed in Dad's footsteps. Ron teaching film. Aren't we doing great? TV at the university. John produced and distributed training and educational films. Jean, like Mom, was a caregiver and became a nurse. I want to mention now that Jean's husband, Gib, is here today. His daughter, their daughter, Gadine, and son, Steve, and daughter-in-law, Becky. So raise your hands so they know who they are. So it's really nice. Gib drove 4.5 hours to be here today with us. I did not become mayor like Dad, but I've made a career out of working for mayors and city councils. So he had that influence on me. Mom and Dad's love of working, both with people, has been a major influence in all of our lives. Thank you again for letting us share our parents with you, and thank you for your donations to ECHS. Thank you.
Jan?
Okay.